all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Good day. I'm Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today here on Veterans Radio, and thanks for joining us. We've got some interesting stories for you. We always want to remind you you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or at the web, veteransradio.org, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.org. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. And finally, PuroClean. PuroClean is the paramedics of property damage. It provides water damage remediation, flood water removal, fire and smoke damage remediation, mold removal, biohazard cleanup. It also has a focus on veteran franchisees. You can learn more about them by going to puroclean.com. We just want to remind you that Veterans Radio podcasts are available on all your favorite streaming platforms, including rss.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Rees Across America Radio. So wherever you are, you can find us. We were recently identified as in the 15th spot, if you will, of the top 100 veteran-centric podcasts by FeedSpot. So we're really pretty proud of being in the top 15. So listen in wherever you're at to veteransradio.org and its podcasts. We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today, Kathleen Utley Kornahrens. Probably got that wrong. Help me with the last name.
No, that was perfect.
Okay. Kathleen is a U.S. Air Force veteran. She went to the Air Force Academy back in the day, which is what we're going to talk about, a little history and a little kind of what's going on now. But Kathleen, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Well, thanks, Jim. It's very exciting to be here.
Well, you had, whether you knew it or not, you were in a historic class at the Air Force Academy. Tell us a little bit about your deciding to go to the Air Force Academy, because you have a book out called Bring Me Men, Brought Me Women, Marching with the First Female Cadets at the U.S. Air Force Academy. Now, we've just given away part of the story by reading the title, but go ahead and tell us about it.
Well, there was no way I could have planned to go to the academy when I was a little girl or in high school. I was raised in a military family. My father was U.S. Army, World War II and Korea. My mother also served in the Navy. She's still with us at 105. I think she might be maybe the oldest U.S. Navy female veteran out there.
Wow.
I don't know, but she was a storekeeper, and but I never saw my mom in uniform, and my dad retired when I was 8. So I didn't really have the typical Army brat young childhood, but the idea of military and service and discipline was all part of my upbringing. And
that actually had caused you to live overseas and learn another language a little bit in those early years, it seems.
That was after, when my dad retired, we were living in Miami, and with the influx of Cubans into the area, he thought that we should learn how to speak a second language. So he took us lock, stock, and barrel to live in Costa Rica, put us in the local schools, and said, sink or swim, goodbye, good luck. And within 2 years, we were fluent in Spanish, and then returned to the U.S. in my junior year in high school to figure out what was going to be next.
And you went to a small town in Florida. I want to give some color to the background here, because this leap into the Air Force Academy at that point in time in the mid 70s is really an unusual leap. So give us a little more background here of the girl you were.
Well, the girl I was very much molded because of that experience of going to a foreign country, living in a different environment, being an unusual person, and coming back and realizing that the world is big, the opportunities are big, and I was in a small town and wasn't exactly sure how do I continue that kind of life when my science instructor, my science teacher in high school, stopped me in the hall one day and said, "Oh, Kathy, the Air Force Academy is opening up to women." And
what did that? So, your reaction was probably, so what?
I didn't even know what that meant, but it planted the seed. And another classmate was applying. His father was Air Force. He wanted to go to the academy. So we just followed the procedure together towards an application and final acceptance. He unfortunately did not get in. And the procedure to go to the academy is not exactly like any other college. There's physical fitness testing. There's lots of procedures that you go through with your senator or congressperson to get a nomination. Because my father was retired military, I got my nomination through the presidential channels, but still, it's pretty involved.
And this was to be the first class of women that were admitted to the Air Force Academy. Is that right?
That is correct. In October of 1975, President Gerald Ford signed an Appropriations Act that had within it the one paragraph that mentioned allowing women to enter all the U.S. military service academies. So that was in October, and by December, there was a full-blown publicity run that every high school received a pamphlet. The superintendent of the academy was all around the country on television and making speeches trying to populate that first class with women, and I was there in the hall at high school at the right time.
Well,
heard the right words.
This is a really exclusive club because in 1976, there were something like 1,700 women applied, but only 157 spaces. Is that about right?
That is correct. Yes, that is correct.
And that's the class that graduated in 1980 and became the class that had its first set of female cadets who survived these tough 4 years. Tell us a little bit about those tough 4 years.
Well, they were extraordinarily tough. The interesting part about it was we came together, 1,500 of us, men and women. So 157 women and the 1,436 men in our class. So we were the first co-ed class, but the men in our class never knew anything different. They came with us. They were a part of a co-ed class. The classes ahead of us were not as welcoming. So from the very beginning, it was a lot of harassment, a lot of yelling, but some of that was gender neutral. Everyone got yelled at. It was basic training, and that's how it went. The interesting thing about the Air Force Academy is they started planning in 1972 when the Equal Rights Amendment came out, they started planning to have women within the academy if Congress mandated. So when Ford signed the legislation in October, they went full on with the plans. They printed the whole plans and programs on that same day, October 7th. And it was the first time one of their plans and programs was printed with a pink cover. They ordered special pink paper.
And part of this is it's a little maybe difficult to think back 50 years for some of our veteran radio listeners, but we're talking about the plans had to include accommodations, dormitory rooms, showers, bathrooms. The whole physical setup had to be rethought a little bit, as 10% of the class, if you will, roughly, were women in that opening class.
The academy budgeted $100,000 to make all of the accommodations for the women, which included converting some of the locker rooms down in the gymnasium in the field house, which included converting latrines so they were, they ripped the urinals off the wall. It included a separate area, which wasn't built separately, but it was. Fire doors were put in, privacy doors to separate the women. And the original plan was for 150 to 157 women all housed in this separate area of the dorms. And all of that done in 8 months. So there was a lot going on. Uniforms procured. Some of the stories are pretty funny because when we arrived, they only had socks in small sizes. So the women that had bigger feet, socks didn't fit. They didn't have any undergarments for the women, and they had a young airman waiting at J.C. Penney's by the telephone, and he got a call with measurements, and he had to run by bras or underwear for each of the women as we came through.
Back to this. Even today, we find that the military is still adjusting its uniforms to accommodate women in the service. So it's been a long road to get to the right spot here. One of the things you mentioned were the locker rooms, and I want to bring this up because I'm sure there was no change in the academic programs because women were put into the academy. But athletics and physical training is such an important part of every academy. They want their students to be involved in extracurricular activities. Tell us a little bit about that aspect of the first 4 years of having women in the United States Air Force Academy.
Well, as much as possible, at least at the Air Force Academy, they tried to include the women. Co-ed teams. I played team handball co-ed. I played water polo co-ed as a squadron intramural. They also had regular intercollegiate teams that were started right away, first year, with the women who had that kind of background in high school. Like they ran track in high school, then they ran track for the academy. There were a few things. We didn't do wrestling. There were a few accommodations, and the academy tried very hard not to change too many of the accommodations. Now we had physical fitness tests every year, and the standards for the men and the women were a little different because of physiological differences. But we all went to intramurals or intercollegiate sports. We all took PE, different sports, and participated. We all did the morning runs, all of us together, full fatigues, combat boots, and rifles. So they tried to keep it as even as possible.
Well, we're talking to United States Air Force veteran and Academy grad Kathleen Kornahrens, and the start of the book is Bring Me Men. And it's not until I did a little research that I understood what that was about. Now, every Academy grad would, but tell us where that phrase comes from at the Academy.
So when we arrived, and so when all cadets arrived at the academy, up until our year, or up until the year 2003, you arrive at the bottom of a giant ramp that leads from a parking area and a giant concrete canyon almost up a ramp that leads to the cadet area, which is a giant square with dorms on two sides, the chapel, and then the academic buildings. And above that ramp, in giant silver letters, were the words, "Bring me men."
And that, again, took the Academy until, I think you said it was like 2003, maybe?
2003, correct.
To remove that phrase comes from a 1894 poem, apparently, by Sam Walter Foss, extolling the expansionist spirit of the country. And the first two lines read, of the Coming America poem reads, "Bring me men to match my mountains, bring me men to match my plains." And that's where that comes from. But it had to feel a little out of date, out of sorts when you and the subsequent classes started arriving, didn't it?
Well, my daughter, it's funny because my daughter asked me that, and I said we didn't have time to look at it for the first couple years. You know, it was keeping your eyes caged, looking straight ahead, march, look at the back of the airman in front of you. But after a while, and knowing the history of the words, that it came from a poem, and in my own mind thinking, okay, this is men in the worldly sense, not in the gender sense, I was okay with it. I mean, I marched up the Bring Me Men ramp on day one, and I marched down when we graduated. However, as time went on, nobody can say for sure how other people interpreted it. And the fact that others were potentially interpreting it with malintent or some kind of prejudice that women didn't belong, and because of the sexual assault scandals at the Academy, between Congress and the Academy administration, they decided to take the words down.
Well, it certainly was a bad look in the 2000s, so
it was
more than time to go. And I should point out from a little bit of additional research that probably over 15,000 women have now graduated from the different military academies: Air Force, West Point, Naval, Coast Guard, Merchant Marines. And the Merchant Marines Academy actually had women in the class in 1974, so a little bit earlier, before President Ford signed his bill into law. And it's sort of interesting how many people have now gone through there. We certainly have a number of friends, women who have graduated from the Air Force Academy. Actually just saw one last week at a football game. And there's if you survive, I think this is true of any academy, if you survive that academy, that's an experience that binds you to all of those other 15,000 women. Do you feel that?
I feel it more than ever, and I feel it especially this year, because this year is the 50th year since President Ford signed that bill. And my talk at the Ford Library was going to be honoring that anniversary. And there have been 50 celebrations across the U.S. with women from all of the service academies to celebrate that sisterhood, that long line of women who have graduated. In fact, on the 7th of October, a group of women rang the bell, the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange.
Again, it's a very small club when you think about it, really. And you served from 1980 to 1985, and afterwards, I believe, picked up an MBA from Rensselaer Polytech Institute, RPI, and went on to a long career in education with some of the toughest assignments I can think of. You actually taught middle school kids. Oh my goodness.
I worked with middle schoolers. I did. And my academy training came in handy.
Probably hand-to-hand combat and how to take abuse, verbal abuse from kids. but let's not gloss over the fact that there were rough spots during these initial 4 years. You've mentioned the harassment. It sounds like maybe particularly from class mates who were not in the original class, who had gone through just with men in the class the 3 years prior. And unfortunately, we have we continue to hear stories out of the academy of sexual harassment and mistreatment. Talk a little bit about your experiences, but your views today, looking back on what the academy maybe could do better or different in this regards.
Well, let me say this in terms of why the experiment of our class was a success. One, because there was positive leadership that were promoting the idea of this being a good thing. There was not at the Air Force Academy. There was planning and preparation. As I told you before, we were billeted in a separate area. That turned out to be not a good idea. And the administration of the academy, the superintendent, the dean, and the commandant had the leadership foresight to pivot. They weren't so embedded in their decision, they couldn't change it. So in the middle of the year, instead of having us just in 20 squad, half of the academy and in a separate area, they moved us to all of the academy. So by the time the second group year women came through, the whole academy was integrated. So that was a wonderful success. There was success because our classmates helped us, because it was men and women working together. And like I said before, they didn't know any other academy. It was a co-ed school with our class, and they were incredibly supportive. So many of those things went right. There were decisions that were made that were defined by small items that became large. For example, uniforms. We weren't allowed to march in skirts. But because we had to go to class in skirts and march immediately after, all the women had to run and change and come back. And that decision was made based on something visual and not actually the functional needs of the airman or the cadet that was at the academy. So those kind of things were lessons learned. The academy now has close to 30% women.
Yeah,
women graduated. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. You triggered some more research that I did, which is the graduating class is 31 this year was 31% women, 69% men. 23% of the overall class were minority. 45% of the class had undergraduate pilot training. And this is a scary factoid from the website. The high school GPA to get into the academy was 3.88. Let's call it 3.9. I don't know about you, but I didn't have a 3.9 in high school. These are smart men and women, is my point.
They are smart, and they're also aware. And I think that's a good thing, is because of what's available on the academy websites, what students know from their liaison officers when they're in high school, what the academy does in outreach to bring information to young students that are thinking about going to the academy, what they can see on YouTube about what to expect. They're a lot more prepared than we were. I was totally blind. I had no idea.
So the small town, they're better off than the small town girl from Florida who spoke
Spanish.
And
some of the men in our class,
heck? Let's try.
Let's just try this. I want to do something different. No idea how different that was.
You mentioned liaison officers, and I want you to talk about this, because anybody who's maybe got a son or a daughter thinking about an academy, nowadays there's a whole, you really have to work at getting yourself in line to get an appointment, congressional or otherwise. But there's this little secret club called liaison officers that I think most people don't know about till too late. Tell us what a liaison officer is.
So the liaison officers are the representatives of the Air Force Academy that have a certain territory. Our son is a 16 grad from the Air Force Academy. So when he was in high school and he wanted to talk about going to the academy, instead of hearing mom and dad's war stories, we called the local liaison officer to come over and talk to him and give him the current story, the current scoop on what the academy was expecting, what he should do at what time, because there are a lot of gates to prepare for your appointment and your nomination and your acceptance. And so the liaison officer is that guide that gets you through each step. And yes, high school guidance counselors know stuff, and the academy admissions office certainly knows, but that local liaison officer is an Air Force officer, sometimes a reservist, but available to those high school students to help them, guide them through the process.
It's really a fantastic resource that, again, many kids don't know about till too late, because you really have to start this process not in your senior year, ideally in your sophomore year, when you can start lining up and checking all the boxes and taking all the courses and doing all the extra work. But you need somebody to guide you or point you in a direction, and that's one of the things the liaison officers do that, again, most people don't know about. When you were writing this, and this is a monumental task to write this history from 50 years ago, talk a little bit about, what were you thinking when you took on this project, and what surprised you out of it?
My initial attempt at writing down the story was because I wanted to tell my children. So I have two daughters and a son, and I wanted to tell them the story of our class, of my journey through the academy. Their father is a classmate, so all of that was the attempt at writing. But as I started writing down my story, my letters to my parents' letters to me, other classmates came to me and started telling me their stories, and the journey was similar, but the stories were disparate, and everyone had a little bit of a different experience. Whether it was primarily in the athletics, they soared in the athletics, or they struggled in the academics, or vice versa. Time management, didn't understand military rank, and it took me forever to identify the pictures of the airplanes when they held them up. So all those things came together, and it made a very unique mosaic of a story. So that's when I started to put it all together.
And what surprised you then as you wrote this?
It surprised me how emotional the writing was. I used to go to the library every single day and just sit down for 3 hours and see what came to me. And the librarian would just bring over a box of tissues, because sometimes the stories were hilarious and funny, and sometimes they were so emotional to remember how hard it was, or how demanding, or how weak I might have felt, or someone else's pain that they had told me. It was hard.
One of the things that comes across when you read it is that resilience, or that desire to get through, right? Tomorrow will be better than today, kind of thing. And I think that's a lesson to be learned by everyone in life. There are going to be those days where you just want to give up, don't you?
You do. And I lost a couple of roommates who decided it wasn't for them. And that was hard, because you felt like this security blanket in your roommate was pulled away from you. But it was just a matter of managing not even the day, but managing the next item on the agenda, whether it was a drill practice, or an inspection, or an exam, or you had to take it just in little tiny steps. And that's one of the things the academy and the military teaches you: how to manage projects, how to manage life, how to manage training in whatever the time management and energy management and emotional management of the moment.
Well, that's why those middle schoolers were so easy for you to work with, because you had really figured out, okay, I just got to get through the moment. So, I mean, that's an important feature. Now, again, the book is titled "Bring Me Men, Brought Women: Marching with the First Female Cadets at the United States Air Force Academy." It's out in paperback. You can get it online wherever you want. There's a lot of life lessons to be learned from this book, and while you didn't underline them and say pay attention, that's kind of a little bit of what's going on, isn't there?
Yes. I mean, being in the military, going to the academy and being in the military was such an amazing, amazing experience in my life that I have reached back and grabbed hold of when I needed to. In the middle school, as a mother, as a wife, as a citizen, you really you've learned more than you know.
Yeah, it helps you remember. You'll get through this. And I often ask somebody, would you have your own, would you recommend to your own child that they go into the military? But you've already answered that question.
I have.
Tell us about your son a little bit, and a little bit about your husband's service.
So my husband is a grad, went to the academy from South Carolina. We met there, actually didn't really date there, but we met there. And he was a B-52 pilot. We were both stationed in Warner Robins, and then again at Rome Air Development Center, Griffiths Air Force Base in upstate New York. The problem with our service was a joint spouse assignment was really difficult back in the day. So after my 5 years, he stayed on a little bit longer, but it got too difficult for us to find assignments together, especially with an operational job in the flying side and a research job on the other side. So, but we both totally appreciate and acknowledge what we got from the military and the academy. And then our son is our youngest. He's a 2016 grad from the academy. Was a C-130 pilot, and now he's flying C-40s out of Scott Air Force Base, which was my first assignment. He's married to another Air Force pilot, so they're working the joint spouse, and I'm very happy to say it's a lot better for them than it was for us.
Well, it's a great testament to the Air Force. It's a great story that you've told, and we recommend it to people. And certainly, thanks for your pearls of wisdom, both in the book and today on our discussion. Kathleen, thanks for spending a little time with Veterans Radio.
Thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Fausone. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800 or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows by visiting us at veteransradio.org. That's veteransradio.org. We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. Legal Help for Veterans, a veterans disability law firm with a national practice before the VA, can help you on your claims and your appeals. It can be reached at legalhelpforveterans.com or 1-800-693-4800. And PuroClean, a leader in property emergency services. It's the paramedics of property damage, providing water damage remediation, flood water removal, fire and smoke damage remediation, mold and biohazard cleanups. You can reach them at puroclean.com or 800-775-7876. We also want to thank our local sponsors. This would include the Charles S. Kettles chapter of the Vietnam Veterans of America, that's chapter 310, VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423, the American Legion Irwin Preskin Post 46 in Ann Arbor as well, the VA Ann Arbor Healthcare System, and certainly the National Vietnam Veterans of America Association. You can be a sponsor by going to veteransradio.org, clicking on the About Us and our sponsors, and help us out. Keep this program alive for the 21 and 22 years. Keep us going for another 20. Thank you.